Good evening. Well, tonight's topic, for those of you who are going to be actually attending, is I'm going to tell you very important because the very first slide, one of the most famous works of art from ancient China, is very high probability or has a high probability of being on the final, along with at least one or two others. And so hopefully we'll be joined soon by a few other people. I know it's supposed to, is it raining up there yet? It was supposed to be storming, but hopefully that, because that could cause connection problems from your end or, people up in the North Bay. It isn't raining here yet, but it's not supposed to be a heavy storm though. So that shouldn't be an issue. Anyway, I did have some temporary connection, you know, your network connection is weak or I forget what it says, during my afternoon class, but it had nothing to do with the weather and they just resolved quickly on their own. Okay, well, anyway, let's get started with first a couple of announcements before we get to our must-know slides, because tonight's topic is art of ancient China and art of ancient Japan, two really important cultures that, of course, have been very influential throughout the world for thousands of years. Well, hundreds at least in the case of Japan, when they didn't open up before, of course, but the Chinese were already influential for thousands of years before the modern era. So we'll cover those in a few minutes. Remember your papers, just two main announcements. Your papers, your second short papers are due 1 week from tonight by midnight on Monday, April 25th. And I've done this before, but I'll do it again for the sake of those who either missed this or somehow weren't paying attention, perhaps at the moment when I held it up last time, that this is the format to send your short papers in. Of course, I mean, the way you should identify them as a PDF, and then art 1.1, of course, short paper number 2, underline last name, comma, first name. And please, if you want them to arrive safely and your grade to be sent back to you in a timely manner and not get sidetracked or delayed, it's best if you send it to me at markw@aol.com. Obviously, I will accept them if you sent them to Outlook, but I just today, for instance, twice I tried to a new recently enrolled student. He just moved here from Africa. And he needed some help with, he had never done a paper like this before. I don't know, where he came from, where they did, research papers in any case. So I sent him some information and the links and stuff. I mean, not the links, the PDFs, right, that you guys all have about how to write the papers and everything. And I couldn't on Outlook. He contacted me there. They wouldn't let me send them to him. I have no idea why. Maybe it's because his name is Good Luck, his first name. That's not an uncommon name in Africa. And it didn't recognize it. So I just gave up and had to ask him to contact me on AOL, where I don't have that issue, nor on Gmail or Yahoo. So it's just safest and quickest for you to do for all your assignments. Of course, the remaining two, right, obviously, are the second paper and the final exam, and any extra credit on the AOL website if you can. Okay, I have responded to a couple of people that had questions about some of the one person, I forget who it was, doesn't matter, the name isn't what's important, but sent me an email saying they still hadn't gotten their grades, and I know they got them now because somehow their inbox wasn't receiving them. If anything like that happens, then that's really important for you to contact me on AOL, because it's so much easier. For instance, deleting things on those two websites, it takes forever to delete things on Outlook, and it's just at least as much spam, probably more proportionate or percentage wise on Outlook, at least on the faculty website, the way I've seen it. And so I don't have to wade through all, as many things. So it's just much better overall to use for me in this class, since I don't do Canvas. All right, and then extra credit. Let's see. I think I have the roster here. I'm not going to read anybody's total points or anything out, but pretty sure I said this last week that nobody's even close to the maximum of 60 or even halfway. think one or two people have 20 points, and a couple people have 5 or 10. So you can still got plenty of time to do extra credit if it could be a very valuable, possibly the difference even of in the margin between, enough points to get an A or a B, or even a B and a C. And I've seen people miss one of the, better grades, an A or a B, by just a few points who didn't do extra credit. So just word to the wise, keep that in mind. Does anybody have any questions now about anything relating to grading or extra credit at all? Because of course, again, as always, I'll stick around afterwards. Now, since we have two really important topics, we'll go ahead and I'm going to cut one from each of the two selections, but I still think we may end 10 minutes early at most. But one way we could do that for sure, maybe even a few minutes earlier than that, is to take a 15-minute break if people agree with that. Let's see how we'll take a vote or whatever consensus when we get to the end of the first half, which is.
I have one question, sorry.
Sure. Now, go ahead.
For the extra credit, it's just 2 museums, right?
Well, there's so many options. They're all listed at the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page. Here we go. No, we'd have some late arrivals. Okay. Hi, welcome. Yeah, now we've got, okay, good. We haven't started the slides yet. We're just talking about extra credit options. They're all listed at the bottom of the course grading policies handout. And if you didn't get that, I know everybody who was enrolled at least the first 2 weeks of the semester got it. But if you need me to resend it, I can. Yeah, the museums, you can go twice. If that's what you're asking, any one category, you should limit to twice. Like, for instance, 2 movies about artists, right? I've covered all this, but briefly again, it's just where you watch a minimum of a 60-minute documentary or film on. It doesn't have to be about an artist now. I've decided to expand it to any topic relating to visual arts. So dance wouldn't qualify, right? But painting, sculpture, architecture, photography, whatever, about any period, any style, any artist, and write 2 pages of what you learned from that movie or documentary. That you can do that twice. You can go to 2 art museums. You have to show me proof that you attended the art museum. Somebody asked me, it might have been this class, if just a brochure would do. Not really, because you can pick up a brochure, outside the museum or at the entrance before you go in. So you do need to have someone sign it, because I know there are free days as museums. It's a good thing all over the Bay Area, at least once a month. Almost every museum has 1 free day, or some every week. Yeah. So if you don't pay to get a ticket, usually, there has to be someone at the front desk at the docents, or someone, who's checking people in, even if it's just to make sure that everyone who. Pardon?
I was they gave me this because it was free admission at the International Art Museum.
Oh yeah, I think you mentioned that. Yeah. Well, you do need to have it signed by somebody to say you were there. That was the rule. I mentioned that at the beginning of the semester. Or if you took photos inside, but some museums won't let you take photos of any.
Oh no, I wasn't allowed, but I took one anyways.
Well, I hope you got someone to verify you were there. Someone who works with the museum. I mean, it could be a security guard, but they don't usually like to do that, because that's not. But a curator, every museum has to have a curator, or it can't be open. Those are the people that run the museum, and those can be anywhere. So did you get something like that? Because I think it was you and maybe 1 or 2 other people also in my other online class had the similar question. And I just have to have some evidence.
They signed one for me. So
sorry?
They signed, I got 2 of these, and they signed one to show you.
So. Oh, perfect. Okay, then just send it to me as a PDF, or screenshot, whatever, something I can open and see. All right, then you get 10 points for doing that up to 2 times. You can do 4 articles, because that's 5 points for each article. That would make 20 points. And you can also log on to, or download rather, either of my 2 art-related novels, and you have to show me the last chapter, otherwise it doesn't prove you did download them. And whether you read them or not, it's your choice, time being what it is. I know people are really busy, but if you read even part of them, you can also post a brief review on Amazon. And so each one of those is worth 15 points, and then the reviews are worth 10 if you post them on Amazon. And then there's the field trip, which I'll go ahead and say, but we want to get to the first slide, please. And that looks likely to be, oh, sorry, Samuel, sorry, I hope you were, there you go. Great, sorry, I didn't, That's happened with a couple of people. Okay, we haven't got to, you haven't missed anything. We haven't started the slides. We're about to. I'm just saying I'm planning now. The odds are 80%, I'd say, that I will do a walking tour. I do have to find an assistant to help me, and it can't be one of my current students. That'd be a conflict. Who can take attendance and do all the logistical stuff at the start of the tour, and of course confirm at least 2, if not 3, maybe 4 interiors, houses or other interiors that we can visit, where the owners are okay with that. They may say, please have all your students or visitors. It's not just for Santa Rosa GC. This is open to anybody. And that would be, on a Sunday, one of the second or third Sunday in March, or the first Sunday's too soon. I'll know before the end of April, and I'll send you an email if we're going to do that. That's where 20 points is for showing up and attending. But there is a small fee. I already said that because no one pays for the time. It takes quite a few days to organize these tours. But it's an interesting way to learn about something you never otherwise have a chance to go into, and get 20 points. And you can invite friends if they're interested. But we'll get to that. I'll let you know either way by the end of this month. All right, one more time. Any other questions about extra credit? I'll stick around as I always do afterwards. Okay, we have a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get to our first slide. And this is really an interesting work. I think some of you may even know of it. And it is, I said, but some people just joined us after the first few logged on. This has a high probability, not just possibility, of being on the final, because it's such an important work or it's a multitude of works of art, but it's a site. So we'll say an important site for covering ancient Chinese art. So here we go. It's the first slide for tonight. Qin Dynasty soldiers from Emperor's Tomb. Qin is spelled, at least in Stockstead, Q-I-N. That's the name of the first dynasty of a unified China. I'll explain in a minute. Dynasty, I think you all know, is D-Y, right? N-A-S-D-Y, soldiers from Emperor's Tomb, right? T-O-M, of course, B. Okay, location I just said is China. The date is 210 BC or BCE. So this is a collection of over 7,000 life-size figures, okay, of Chinese soldiers who guarded the tomb of the first emperor of unified China. That's really the most important fact about it. There's no other place like this or site like this in the world. It's never been done that we know of anyway. So again, there are over 7,000 life-size figures of soldiers who were cast, they're ceramic, right? So they're very perish breakable. So that's why they don't travel. Life-size figures of Chinese soldiers who were created to guard the tomb of the first emperor of unified China, the Qin dynasty. It only lasted 2 generations, but that qualifies. The father and then the son. Last name was Qin, Q-I-N. Okay, so that doesn't tell us a lot, though, about what we're looking at. These soldiers would have been modeled after probably literally living soldiers who actually did guard the emperor in real life. And again, some of them may have also guarded his tomb after he died. So they are unique. Here's the most amazing fact, that there are no 2 soldiers, or no 2 figures, I should say, that are alike. It's not just, repeated, copies of the same exact. And here's the evidence of that. Look at their faces and look at their expressions and their head, right, dress or hair. There are no 2 of these 7,000 figures that are alike. Let's see, is that somebody not? Yeah, okay, welcome. Yeah, there we go. All right, so the main point is that you just don't, there's no other place in the world where you can see, there are individual small groups of ceramic figures from all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome. I don't think that the Egyptians did, or the Babylonian ceramic. Well, yeah, the Babylonians did, actually. But they may have done, a few dozens, but nowhere else is there a group of this many. I mean, it's really an army. And it's called, the nickname for this site, if you look it up on the web, is Terracotta Army. Terracotta, of course, is the material that they made these out of. The ceramic material, of course, terra, just like it sounds, kata, 2 words, and this is what they're famous for. They are in a gigantic shed which protects them from the elements and also from vandalism, despite the Laura Croft movies with Angelina Jolie knocking the heads off a bunch of these. The ones that are missing heads, it was just that's how they were found. How were they found? That's another part of the meaning. Fascinating. They were found in the late 70s by workers digging the foundation for some kind of development. I think it was a shopping center. Anyway, some large scale development in southern China. There was no Beijing. Beijing is a new city. It's only a few hundred years old. In this country, we think we have old cities, 400 years old on the East Coast. Well, yeah, but the rest of the world, that's not even remotely old. The newest capitals in the world are places in the Western Hemisphere, like even Mexico City and Havana, which are 500 years old roughly each, are not old by the rest of the world standards. So this was the first capital, and I don't remember the name of the city. You don't need to know that. It doesn't exist anymore. So where they were was when the northern and southern Chinese kingdoms were unified by war, of course. How else would that be? It wasn't by choice. Unified by a war carried out by the first emperor, Qin. Sorry, they call Qin, Qin. And so the Qin dynasty started this unified China. And that's why these are so important. Let's see. Do we still have someone joining us? I guess, yes, we do. Here we go. Okay, good. Yeah, we're well into the first slide here. So sorry, let's go ahead and remove that from the screen. All right, so there's a couple more facts about them. There's not just soldiers here. I think I do. I have a nice extra view. There are also dozens of horses and carts or carriages. Well, carriage was not the right word. I think horses with carts, and the carts are part of the army. I mean, armies, the famous phrase was Napoleon, I think, said armies or an army travels on its stomach. Look at what happened when those nasty invaders tried to take Kiev, and they got stalled, well, by a bunch of things. It's mostly the Ukrainians' defenses, but they didn't have enough weapons enough food or gas to advance on their main target. So yeah, these are the, food cart sounds like some modern phrase, right? But they are supply carts, you could say. And there are hundreds of them. So there are, it's actually hundreds of horses and carts near the back of this area, this giant. Now it's a museum. It's a warehouse converted. We could see, if you look at this slide, that they've now put little miniatures of these figures on display. But these are the original figures. And again, look at them. No two of them have the same expression, the same exact hairdo. It's remarkable. But this is the view, if it's on the exam, that you'll see. And like I said, it's very high probability it would be on the final. Okay, that's pretty much the whole meaning, and that when this happened and the emperor died, these clay soldiers were buried under the earth, and they were discovered, like I said a few moments ago, by workers who were excavating for the foundation of a large commercial development of some kind. And they accidentally stumbled on these soldiers. They've been lost for over 2,000 years. Okay, so that's the whole meaning. Formal analysis.
All right, I have a question. Are the horses different too, all of them?
Yeah, I think, sure, let's take a quick look. I've seen more views than this, but yeah, if you look closely, they're not all the same. They may have the same expression. They almost look more like hippopotamuses, don't they? Or not hippopotamus, rhinoceroses, don't they? Yeah, the horses are different, but not as much. You see this one here, right? And this one doesn't have the exact same. And there's slight differences. There are not as many differences, but there are. So yes, the horses are also uniquely carved. Right. but more similar expressions, I guess. But otherwise, you see these two guys very much. They're probably listening to the emperor tell them something, or at least that's what the intent was. Okay, so let's do the formal elements analysis here. Okay, these are a cool gray-green color. This makes them look gray, but they're actually light green. But either way, it's a cool color. So in this slide, they look more cool. And the horses, though, are warm. The horses have a warm color. So you could just say that they're cool. But if you want to say, actually, now that I think about it, that's right. The green is the original color, and they've turned gray they've been out in the air now for over 40 years, right? These figures. Oh, they're also, one more fact about the meaning, they're still discovering more of them every year. A few more, here and there at the edges. They're still excavating, is what I'm saying, outside the parameter of that museum. They're still finding a few more, mostly soldiers. I suppose some of them are the horses and carts. So they look warm, the horses and some of the soldiers. But the view you're going to have is just this. So all you have to do is write about the soldiers. Okay, so simulated texture, superb, totally realistic with carved, of course, they're clay figures, of course, carved lines to form the details of their faces and their clothing. The rhythm is obvious. They're all roughly the same height. They're all adult, intact, human beings standing upright with uniforms that are roughly the same. And then there is no modeling. These were meant to be buried where there was no light of any kind, sunlight or otherwise. So any light on this photo or in this photo is from the museum, or it's actually a warehouse that's been turned into a museum. So that's not natural modeling. And then we have, they're stable. There's hardly anything dynamic. Now, the horses, to some degree, are more dynamic, but even they are standing mostly straight upright. So the soldiers are definitely stable. The only thing's dynamic is the top of their heads. And then let's see, there's no larger or smaller masses. Oh, well, you could do it this way. You could say the largest masses are the horses, then the carts, and then the soldiers. There's three types of figures. So in that order, horses, second, carts, and third largest are the actual soldiers. The rhythm is obvious. The repeated shapes of the men standing with their arms at their side and their heads, arms, hands, feet. For space, these are life-size figures, roughly 6 feet tall. They would have picked the tallest men for the guards for the emperors during his life and after he died. So they are about 6 feet tall, and they have overlapping, of course, of their clothes over their bodies. They're balanced. Each figure is balanced. And like I said, they actually are, in this case, it looks cool, gray. So most of them, they're slightly discolored here because of the hair that might make part of their uniforms look a little warmer, but they're mostly the original, we think. Probably the originals were more like a earth tone, but that's not what we have in the photo. So you just can say they look cool, right? All right, let's move on. All right, this next figure is one of my favorites. Let's see, this is, let me see, Travelers. Did I know how I cut this from the list? I can't believe I did that. I'm giving you guys a break here.
Was it Travelers Among the Mountains and stuff?
No, that's a good guess, but that's actually another image. That's this. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you what this is very quickly, but we need to keep moving. You can go to the Asian Art Museum. That's obviously an easy extra credit option. In San Francisco, you just take, I don't know, if you get yourselves to BART and take the BART Civic Center station and get out, and it's right there in front of you, or park right underneath where it's safe to leave your car in a guarded parking garage that's owned by the city, right under the street. And that's right in front of the Asian Art Museum, is right next to City Hall in San Francisco. They have a whole room full of these. This would be, yes, I think it was Travelers on a Camel, but it's not on the syllabus, so I won't take too much time. I just think it's beautiful to see these figures are all playing. The guy standing up may be just looking out, as a lookout for where they're going, but they're traveling across the entire inner Asia continent. That's what they do. They go all the way from the coast or parts of the interior of China across the Gobi Desert. It's one of the biggest deserts in the world after the Sahara, bigger than our desert. It's in California. And they cross this big desert, then a whole bunch of mountains, the Himalayas, of course, and then go down all the way into Persia and trade for Persian rugs or other things made by the Persians, who were very advanced, of course, culture then. So this would have been about 600 BC, but it's not on the syllabus, so you guys get a break. I just think it's funny, the camel singing along with these these musicians that are playing instruments, and this guy may be actually singing here. He probably is. Okay, but since not on the syllabus, you don't have to write any of that. Fascinating, isn't it? Giant Buddha carved into a hill. As you know, what happened when the Taliban the last time took over Afghanistan, they dynamited 3 of the largest Buddha figures in the world, if not the 3 largest, dynamited them. That's a crime against humanity in its own right. I mean, what gave them the right to do that? 2,500-year-old statues of a different religion. Okay, so we are now going to do this one, the next must know. This is a very important one. I also won't cut this because it relates to one of the terms. We do have several terms for tonight. Okay, and that's the next must know is travelers among mountains and streams, just like it sounds. Travelers among mountains and streams. We know the artist's name, Fan Kuan. Sounds like a made-up name, but it's the artist's name. First name F-A-N, last name K-U-A-N. Little c you can ignore always, but that means we don't know the exact date, about or circa 1000 AD or CE. So this is an example of Chinese 3-tier perspective, which you see if you're looking on your list of terms is the next, or first for tonight. It's the first new term or definition that you need to write. Every once in a while I have to lubricate my throat. Okay, so what does that mean? Chinese 3-tier perspective. Okay, here we go. The definition. Chinese 3-tier perspective is a technique for depicting space in it's a long definition. There's no way to shorten it. It's a technique for depicting space in a 2-dimensional work of art invented in China, comma, right? In which there are 3 features, in which, number 1, objects in the foreground are shown larger, right, and sharper. Number 2, the middle ground has a hazy, misty look. You see it right there between these cliffs and the background. So again, number 2, the middle ground has a hazy, misty look. And number 3, objects in the distance are shown smaller and sharper. So that means there is a difference in the way, of course, they are showing a distance from Western art. And it's unique to Chinese landscape painting. That's why we credit, some people think this artist, Fan Kuan, invented that technique. So that's one of the facts about this slide. Many historians, believe that he invented the technique of Chinese 3-tier perspective. But I think when you look at it closely, it becomes more obvious how it works. It's actually a pretty accurate way of portraying. It only works though with outdoor, a large landscape. It has to be a pretty large perspective. Here are the rocks or boulders, or bigger than rocks, right? Trees, right? And bushes, which are shown very sharp or sharper than in the middle, right? And large, of course, because they're closest to us, the viewer. Here are the travelers, by the way, if you're curious. There they are down on the road. And then we see the middle ground where it's all hazy and misty, just like it would be if it was in the mountains in the morning. Usually these are, meant to be when the mist is at its highest, either the morning or maybe the late, early evening. And that's in the middle ground, the misty, hazy look. So it's not sharp here. And then the hills in the background, the cliffs, are in the distance. And so the trees and bushes and the cliffs themselves look smaller. but they're still sharp, once again, like the ones at the bottom. I think you can see how that works. So that's a unique invention of Chinese landscape painting about 1,000 years ago. Okay, and the only other thing to say about this is it's kind of important also about the meaning is that this is a scroll, a Chinese scroll painting, which were like about 8 to 10 feet long, meant to be unrolled and hung from some kind of a rod. I mean, that's, or even a nail, you could just say hung, you don't have to say how, on a wall. And they were portable by definition. If they were, meant to be unrolled as you decorate a room or move around from one house to another, then you would have these rolled up and take them with you. And then you could unfold, or unroll is the right word, unroll them. And that's what we mean by scroll painting. And these are the kind of paintings that are, again, a Chinese. Well, it's hard to say they invented them because the Japanese were doing it too, but many historians think the Chinese also invented scroll painting, the kind of landscape painting that's portable, meant to be, and it's always this kind of shape. You don't see them, like square. They're just always rectangular, long, narrow, 8 to 10 foot long paintings on a scroll. And it's usually some kind of silk or other thick material. They did invent paper, but paper ones wouldn't have survived in this condition 1,000 years later. So the Chinese, as you know, right, invented paper and gunpowder. Oh, there's a myth. I looked it up. They didn't invent pizza. Some people think it's Marco Polo went to China and came back with the news about these two new fabulous inventions that Europeans didn't know anything about, that the Chinese did, the paper process of printing, as in hand printing on paper, because the Chinese didn't invent the printing press. That was the Germans. But they did invent gunpowder too, which they used for peaceful purposes. And sure enough, when they went to Europe, it was being used for warfare, for cannons. But he didn't bring back pizzas with him, or the recipes. Those are invented hundreds of years later in southern Italy. Okay, so this could have been a paper back when, if it was, back in 1000 AD or CE. Many of these early scroll paintings, but if they were for a wealthy client, that's usually who they were, because what else would they be done for? But wealthy people could afford fancy, high quality artwork, custom made, and to display in their homes, several in each room, sometimes more than one or two in each room, on a very thick material such as canvas or silk or something. So they were usually only for the upper classes. All right, so that's the whole meaning here. Then we're going to do our formal analysis of warm. It should be obvious, but if it's not, you can say neutral, because technically, yes, all of the dark black lines, like on the cliffs here and these boulders, those are neutral because they're black ink. But the overall color of the entire scroll itself is obviously a warm gold-like color. So they're usually a tan or a light brown. So just say this is a warm color, with the actual details all being done in neutral black ink. There's bold lines and thin lines. Bold lines on the cliffs above and on the boulders below, right? And then thin lines in the middle on the trees. So some of the trees have bold lines too, but many of them are more thin lines. And as you see, there are also thin lines. Well, what few there are on those travelers. It looks like about half a dozen of them on horses. So mostly bold lines, but there are some thin lines too. And then the largest mass is the cliffs in the background, then the boulders in the foreground, and then I would guess you could you decide the smaller rocks or boulders in the upper part of the foreground, however you want to describe that. Obviously, this is full of rhythm with repeated shapes of boulders, rocks, trees, cliffs, bushes, lots of rhythm. It is mostly stable. I know at first glance you might think dynamic. Yeah, they curve, these cliffs at the top in the background curve upward, but overall the facade of that cliff, or that range of cliffs, is stable, as are most of the trees in the middle or the foreground, except for some of them, of course, some of these here. And these both, so it's both, but I think it's more stable overall, the arrangement of the landscape itself. is more stable than dynamic, but there are dynamic details. And the silhouette texture, it's superb. These were some of the best landscape paintings in the world at this time. Remember, this is in the Middle Ages in Europe when there was really not much art worthy of, there was architecture, but there wasn't much painting. And what little there was poorly done. So this is a much higher level of skill here. So the simulated texture on the rocks, on the trees, the cliffs, the bushes, very realistic. Okay, and then the modeling is also very strong and sharp, except in the middle ground where it's hazy, of course, by definition. Let's see, and then for space, we already mentioned that obviously it has this new technique of Chinese three-tiered perspective, but it also has overlapping and diminishing size. So those techniques are pretty much universal for artists, certainly by this time. That was known in Europe, in some of the early religious paintings or icons from 1000 AD. So you see the overlapping the trees over the rocks, of course, and these boulders over the road, the bushes over those cliffs. And then we have the rhythm of the repeated shapes of the cliffs, the boulders, the trees, the bushes. And it's roughly balanced in my mind both ways. It's certainly left to right, it's roughly balanced. Although this cliff's a little higher than this one. Again, depends if you draw the line here, which I think this is the halfway. It's roughly balanced, but you could make the case it's somewhat unbalanced toward the bottom since there's empty sky up above at the top. All right, moving on. This is another one of these uniquely Chinese inventions or creations in their art. This is, let's see, Song Dynasty Guan Ware vase. Song, S-O-N, just like the word song, dynasty, I've already spelled. Guan Ware is two words, G-U-A-N, and then of course Ware, W-A-R-E, vase, China, 1250 A.D. or C.E. Well, we should start with who the Song dynasty was. The Song dynasty came after the Tang, yes, first the Tang and then the Song dynasties. The dynasty before, you get to say it this way, the dynasty before this one, the previous dynasty to the Song, was a period of stability, peace, and prosperity throughout most of the Chinese kingdom. Well, it was really an empire, but you could just say kingdom because they had one ruler, an emperor. And then there was some, breakdown of the peace and stability, as often happens in world history. We'll see it happening again. And that would be with the beginning to see some warfare between different rival tribes or clans in China, within China. There was warfare, you could just say it that way, during the Song dynasty, and beginning to see also some less control of the central government over the entire kingdom. Doesn't mean it was chaos. It wasn't that. It was still a prosperous period in terms of the art and the quality of the objects that were produced, such as those, that last thing we saw, that scroll painting was from the Song dynasty, as this is. So they were still producing great art, but mostly for the upper classes, not so much for people's homes, average people's homes, which the previous dynasty was so prosperous and peaceful and stable that people, average people, we're not talking about, poor working class, but, middle class people, merchants and, professional people could afford some original artwork. But then in this dynasty, the Song dynasty, there was a little less prosperity among the middle and lower classes, but still plenty of great art was produced for the upper classes. That's what this is. Some think was for the emperor's house, palace, but I don't think anyone knows for sure. But it's a classic style of vase, and it's got a technique called the crackle, just like it sounds with a K, crackle technique. I love that word, which is red lines baked into this, obviously it's ceramic, of course, baked into this ceramic. The red lines are there for visual effect, of course, for variety, and also because they are a good contrast, red and blue background. There are also versions of this I've seen with white, totally white ceramic. But either way, that would be warm and cool colors contrasting with each other. On this one, you've got the cool blue as the base color, and then the red. You may not be able to tell, but yeah, you can see there that these are red lines. They're called the crackle effect. That was invented by Chinese vase makers. That's unique to China. At least it was. And then we also have the fact that this vase symbolizes the yin and yang. I'm sure you guys have heard those words, right? The two words, yin with Y and yang, of course, which is the other way to say it. It symbolizes the balance that the Chinese culture and society in China was trying to achieve, or that Buddhists specifically, right, people who believed in Buddhism, and we covered the definition of Buddha last week, right? So we don't have to go over that again. If you missed that lecture, you really want to watch it before the final. So this is a symbolic object meant to, or an object, an object meant to symbolize the balance that they were trying to achieve in Chinese society, both through the Buddhist teachings and just in general. When they could, of course, get peace and stability in their kingdom, they would have achieved a balance, right, between different groups. How does this symbolize balance? Well, I already mentioned one of the three ways. There are three ways. One is the balance between warm and cool colors. The red crackle, the warm colors, balance out with, or are, you could say, a contrast, but they visually they kind of blend in your eye right together. So then with a cool base of blue, so there's a balance between warm and cool colors. Then there's oh, by the way, the lip or tip is gold. Now here it doesn't show, it's such a dark, I guess, the photo itself, but those would have been gold, painted gold. Well, you can see it on the base here, but both the top and the bottom, and of course that's warm again, in combination with the cool base color, and a cool overall color. Okay, so that's the first way. Then the other two ways that this is balanced are, yes, it's symmetrical. We'll do the formal analysis in just a couple minutes. Left to right, of course, right? So it's balanced in terms of symmetry. But the final way it's balanced is in volume. There's no other word for it. Volume, of which it contains equal parts. If you were to draw this bowl, the lines of this bowl all the way to the top of where they would meet when they curve, the area of the bowl and the neck is identical. That's no accident. They had to be very careful on how to measure the interior space before they, of course, made this out of ceramic. And that's the third and most subtle, and I think most sophisticated, right, most advanced technique of the three ways of symbolizing balance in there that they were seeking in Chinese society and through the teachings of Buddha. That, I'll say it again, that the interior space, the volume, that's the only word for it really, is equal on the bowl and the rest of it above the bowl, where the neck begins, right about here. It's the same area covered in between those two parts. And that's very carefully calculated. Okay, formal analysis. Well, I already said the cool and warm colors, you should have that already, are obvious. Don't forget that the gold is part of the warm colors at the ridges, the rims, I should say, on the base and the top of the neck, right? At the lip, I'm sorry, I meant to say. And then for space, it's about 1 foot tall. These pieces could be anywhere from 1 foot to 18 inches. But this is one that's about 1 foot tall. I already said it's balanced left to right, but obviously visually it's unbalanced because the bowl is wider than the neck, unbalanced toward the bottom. The rhythm should be obvious. The crackle effect creates rhythm. You could say that the round, lip and base are, not the same size, but the same shape. And then it's a single mass. And let's see, am I forgetting anything? Balance? I know I must be. Oh, the textures are real smooth texture of ceramic, of course. No cement textures. And the line, it's not drawn. There's no other way to say it's baked. The line here isn't drawn or carved, it's baked. Of course, those red crackles. It's a unique technique. Unique technique. There you go. And so that creates a line, of course. You could make the case there are lines, of course, on the base and the lip to formed by the strip of gold paint. Okay, dynamic, yes, I don't see anything stable about it, right? And there's no modeling. It's a, right, object in a museum with only shadows created by the museum lighting. Here's another version, but that isn't as good a view as the one we just saw. But just so you can see, there's a white version. This one, it doesn't look like the crackles are red, but everyone I've seen, they were. Okay, so now let's see. We're going to do a pagoda. Okay, but I'm going to cut one of these. So let's see, which one are we going to cut? One we don't have. Yeah, I really shouldn't have cut that one about the travelers with the camel, but I did. So you guys get a break on that. All right. So this one I'm not cutting, but why don't we do that now since I brought it up? Shoot, where are my pens? I have so many pens. They're never here when you need them. Okay, so just cross out the second one down on the list of for tonight for the first half on ancient Chinese art. Shang Dynasty Fang Ding. I've had some students say it sounds like the title of a Frank Sinatra song. He did do a song that sounded a little like that. Shang Dynasty Fang Ding. I don't have a good picture, only black and white, and it wasn't even very sharp, an old black and white photo or slide. That's all I could find. So cross out the second one down, okay, on the list of for tonight for Chinese art before 1280, of course. We're not going to cover it. Shang Dynasty Fang Ding, not on the list. Okay, but this one is. So what do we see here? It's the next must know, and this one is Fo Guangxi Pagoda. And actually, I am thinking that I am going to use this. You're going to say they aren't the same thing, but I'll go and explain. I've been to China. I've been all over southern China, not northern China. The oldest pagodas, and there's your next definition, of course, obviously, and there'll be two more, I think, tonight. But the point is that pagodas throughout almost all of the oldest pagodas, and that's what we're talking about, early Chinese, ancient to early medieval Chinese art, are not made out of ceramic or stone. Very, very few are. So I am going to go ahead, and even though this is the one that has that name, this one also could be called the same thing, because even though it's in a different location, it is a pagoda. And I'm going to go ahead and use this slide because it gets across the meaning of that word better, as well as the fact that it's the classic style of pagoda from the early Chinese history. So we'll use that title again. Fo Guang is Foguang, one word, Foguang, C, middle words, three words, SI, like the Spanish word for yes, pagoda, Pagoda, China, 1056 AD. Let me just give you that definition first, and then a little bit of a context about why these things are incredible, these structures, once you realize what you're looking at. And if you ever go to China, don't just go to the big cities or just to the modern parts where the hotels with tourists are, but go take a look at some of their early wooden pagodas. It's amazing. So what is that definition? All right. So first of all, you have to take your list of terms and turn the page, all right, to the top of the next page. A pagoda, right, is a multi-tiered, or you could say multi-level if you prefer, but the right word is tiered, and that's T-I-E-R, not T-E-A-R, of course. A multi-tiered, or if you want to write in parentheses, multi-level temple with wide overhanging eaves. That's what these are, wide overhanging eaves, supported by projecting wooden brackets, period. So with wide overhanging eaves, I'll repeat the whole thing in a moment, supported by projecting wooden brackets. You can see that on each level of this slide, but you can see why I didn't choose to use this view of an almost identical period, style, and area of China. This pagoda is within maybe a few tens of miles of the other one, but it doesn't have the classic traditional style of pagoda where I don't remember seeing any like this. So again, I'll repeat that definition. It's one that could easily come up and very likely will on the true false section, right, of the final. Or possibly, I'm not saying this slide is so important. I always will tell you when there's a slide that's so important, I definitely won't cut it from the study list. And I already said that about the first two slides of Chinese art we saw tonight. So not saying that this is that level of importance, but there is a very strong likelihood that the word pagoda will appear somehow either in one of the slide essays or the true false section of the final. Okay, so a quick context here. These are amazing structures that took many years to build, and they can reach a height of 9 stories, which is taller than anything at that time. We're talking about the early to Middle Ages in Europe, right? Now, when we get to Romanesque art, we will cover Romanesque churches. That begins around 1000 or so. Then you do see stone churches with towers that are even taller. But wooden structures, no. These were the tallest wooden structures in the world. And they were remarkably complicated and ornate. You could say, you have to write it. It's intricate. I'll give you the notes about the meaning in just a second. But you can tell by looking at this slide, this thing has been standing. And how many stories is it? Or how many levels or tiers? Well, let's count. 6. When I first went to Canton, I know no one calls it that anymore, Guangdong province, Guangzhou is the biggest city there, and it's in lockdown now. You know about the COVID outbreak there in southern China. Shanghai, 26 million people. Guangzhou, about 14 million. Total lockdowns. People can't leave. Well, maybe some of them can leave their homes, but not their neighborhoods. Wouldn't want to deal with that. So this is in southern China, and there you can you can start writing, because this is part of the meaning of this slide. Okay, so I'll just say the point is that these were developed, these multi-story wooden pagodas. They were the tallest wooden structures in the world at that time, and they could reach a height of 9 stories, or about 200 feet. And these are the original buildings. We're not talking about a reproduction or recreation. They weren't destroyed, luckily, by the Japanese invasions in World War II or anything, earthquakes or anything else. Hundreds of them survived. And this is, again, the last aside here. I got to climb up one of these 9-story ones, the tallest one in Guangzhou, that city. And it was just breathtaking. I almost fainted because it was 110 degrees and the humidity was 90%. There's no elevators, right? So you got to be in good shape to climb to the top. But they're open to the public. But most of these museums now, because the Chinese government is communist and they are atheists. They don't believe in religion. They allow people to worship outside of public spaces, privately. And then a few authorized churches or temples they do allow, but not very many. So all of these pagodas now that I saw in China, also in Hong Kong, they're all just museums now, but they're fantastic. Yeah, okay, so now this is a pagoda. I define what pagoda is, and it was originally built, obviously it's only part of the meaning, as a temple for the dominant Buddhist religion, which by the time this was built, Buddhism had spread beyond India all the way across Southeast Asia. So you should be writing this if you didn't already know it, into both China and Japan. We're going to see the evidence of Japanese Buddhist influences and the differences in their style of Buddhism after the break. So by this time, Buddhism was the dominant religion all over Asia. Is it anymore? Well, you define this. Hindus, there are more Hindus than there are Buddhists because India is such a huge country. So it depends on how you want to define dominant, but it still is one of the world's largest religions. But back then it was the dominant religion, Buddhism, throughout almost all of Asia. from India all the way into China and Japan and even north into Korea. And these were temples, Buddhist temples, where people would worship regularly. And you could come in anytime if you were a traveler and maybe even be given some food, right, by the priests. The priest would maintain them and conduct the religious services as part of the meeting in these temples. They would live nearby, and they would help travelers or people who needed help if they came, not just to worship. Of course, that's the main purpose for them, but also if they had some need that the priest could help them with. So they were
Wait, did I miss?
rest stops. You could say rest stops for travelers.
What is
Yes.
the beliefs for this church?
Say again. I'm sorry. What? Say that again.
Are they Buddhist?
Yes, that's what I
Oh.
just said. Yeah, yeah. I'm saying the Buddhists were the dominant religion throughout Asia by this time, right? I said we remember last week we covered how they started in India, Buddhism. Now there's very few Buddhists in India, ironically, but back then there were, and so the Buddhists spread first from where it was born in India all the way across Southeast Asia. You know what that means, right? Burma, which I don't use Myanmar, that's what the military dictatorship calls it, but it's originally Burma, all the way into Vietnam, all the way north into China, all the way through China and into Japan and Korea. So that's a huge chunk of humanity. It's more than half of the human race at that time. Probably. You can't prove that and you don't have to write that, but it's somewhere in the ballpark, roughly. A half of the entire human population was Buddhist then, at the height of when Buddhism dominated all of Asia, which is when this was built. Yes, these were Buddhists. So the monks or priests, you can call them either word, were Buddhist who ran this, right? And then who welcomed people both for their religious ceremonies and to help travelers, or even, I don't know, maybe even homeless people, but certainly people who had a need, you know, that they could solve, such as food or water, or maybe even help finding a place to stay. It was part of their task, not just to conduct religious ceremonies. So yes, these were full functioning houses of worship. And I was about to say, when you just stopped to ask me that question, that I would call them rest stops too. You don't want to call them, you know, service centers. That's too modern a term, but they were kind of like a rest stop. Travelers could see a pagoda from miles away. And if they were desperate for food or water or just to rest, they know that they'd get some help when they went there, which was a concept of the Buddhist, you know, the teachings of Buddha, right, is to help people. Pretty impressive. And these are the original 1,000-year-old structures. It's remarkable. Okay, so now, I think we got one more person here joining us. Whoops, that is Drew. Okay, welcome, Drew. We're on the third, or is it fourth now, of the early ancient Chinese arts. But of course, it's being recorded, so you can see it posted, I meant, broadcast. I know some people are probably watching the Warriors game. I would be too if I wasn't teaching. I forgot to record it. I'll have to go set the recorder during the break. Okay. Anyway, back to the past here. All right, let's do a formal analysis. This is a fantastic structure because I already mentioned that it's 6 stories tall. So let's talk about the space. It's a 6-story structure, about 100 feet tall, because each story is about 15 feet, 15 or 16. And then you have the finial. Remember the word finial? I did say that might be useful. I think I said that. At least it's close to 100. So say it's about 100 feet. And each story is a little over 15 feet high. The interiors, of course, they're rooms with staircases along the edges. I've walked up several of those, right? So those are what the rooms are. One large open room on each of the 6 stories, with staircase leading to the top, and roughly 100 feet total height. That's the space. The largest mass, well, the bottom level is slightly wider than the others, and actually a little taller too. There'd probably be a statue of Buddha inside. Almost always there was a statue of Buddha inside these pagodas. And of course, because it's Buddhist, but also usually on the ground floor. So someone who's elderly or couldn't, or you know, disabled, might not be able to climb those stairs. They could at least go in and worship inside on the first floor. So I meant to say that's part of the meaning, but also for the space, the ground floor is the largest mass if you break it down. And then the other floors are also almost all the same mass. So it does seem to get slightly narrower. So you could say the second largest mass are the 2 second and third levels. And then these are all about the same. And then its balance is totally symmetrical by definition. All pagodas are left to right. However, it does get wider toward the bottom. The last couple of levels are wider. So that would make it unbalanced, of course, toward the bottom. Then we have the rhythm is a repeated shape of the eaves. That's a word that would be helpful to have in your notes if you don't already know that word. I mean, modern architecture often doesn't use that, but almost every kind of house or public building for thousands of years had overhangs to protect people from the wind and the rain as they're, standing on a balcony or about to enter right on the ground floor here. So the eaves, right, create rhythm, as do the brackets, the projecting wooden brackets, hundreds of them, and the windows. So there's lots of rhythm. It's dynamic on the eaves, and because it's octagonal, or is it hexagonal? I think it's six-sided, so it's hexagonal. You could just say multi-sided. There's a diagonal to the outer walls. So those are dynamic, but then each wall is stable. The ground floor is just a solid rectangle. So it's both stable and dynamic. The walls are stable. The eaves and the brackets are dynamic. The textures here are real rough wood, real smooth tile. All the roof's covered in clay tile. Real rough, I think it is wood on the ground floor, so real rough wood, and then real smooth glass in the windows. They did have glass that far back in China. So all real textures, no simulated textures. The modeling is the shadows from the sun, but look how powerful it is to protect you from the, it gets very hot in South China. It was one of the two hottest places I've been. The other would have been Egypt. Well, Cuba gets pretty hot too, but Egypt was even hotter. So Egypt or Vietnam, Egypt, and South China, the weather is hot and humid all through the late spring until mid-fall. So this is helping to cool the building. These shadows here created by the overhanging eaves. So that is part of the design, but it's natural modeling from the sun, of course. The lines here, you have several kinds. You have visual lines around the edges or corners, right? Like all architecture does. But you also have carved line on the balconies and the brackets. No question, that's carved line. And then here's painted line. These are added later, probably, though. Frankly, these look much later. Pre-communist era, I'm pretty sure, like early 19 or mid 1900s probably. So originally these weren't here, so you really wouldn't see painted line. It would have just been the carved line and the visual lines. Let's see, modeling space. I already said it's balanced. The rhythm, the shape of each of these, and then let's see. I think I did the masses, didn't I? Yeah. Oh, color. Yeah, that would be helpful. The color is mostly warm on the walls, even down on the lower floor. It's a kind of a light, colored wood, different wood probably than the upper floors, which are all a very deep brown. So obviously that's a warm earth tone all the way up the pagoda. And then you have cool colors on the tiles. Unlike Western tiles, you have to write this, but most tiles in Spanish colonial architecture, right, and all over Europe and Italy and right, Spain, they're red clay tiles, but these are not. These are bluish gray colors, and that's obviously cool. Again, you can ignore these signs because that's not original, not part of them. Okay, let's see how we're doing on this. I think I covered everything here, right? Modeling, textured line. Okay, Travis Tang. Oh, guess what? I didn't cut this. I was right the first time. Sorry, well, it's a good thing here. Well, this is being recorded anyway. This I did not cut. Don't ask me how I overlooked it. Tang Dynasty Camel from Tomb. Sorry, Tang, T-A-N-G, Dynasty. I've heard it pronounced Tong, but it's spelled T-A-N-G. Sorry, one last must know. We're still going to end the first half before 8, so certainly on time for a break. And we'll probably end a few minutes early, 10 maybe early for the second half. All right, sorry, T-A-N-G. Yeah, I didn't think I cut this. Sorry, it's been a long day. Dynasty, you already know how to spell. 2 words, Tang. Second word, Dynasty, Camel, from Tomb. China, of course, 750 AD. So I said earlier, but I didn't ask you to write. So now you do need to write that the Tang Dynasty was a period of prosperity and stability and peace throughout China. And because it was a period of prosperity, stability, and peace, that meant that travel increased between China and the Middle East and India, of course, also India. But these travelers were heading towards Persia, most historians believe. There are Chinese merchants. You could say traders if you want. That actually isn't inaccurate. Sitting on top of a camel, and they have months, and it would take months to go. How far? I said this before, but I didn't actually write it, so now you do want to say, where would they go? They'd go from some large Chinese city where they had some, of course, it would have been handmade goods, Chinese handmade goods, to trade with Persia. In this case, if they went to Persia, which is now Iran, I think everyone knows those two names are synonymous. So they would have gone to what was then the kingdom of Persia to trade their objects, which they've already done here, for something very valuable that they didn't have in China: Persian rugs or spices or silk. Well, they had silk in China, so some other kinds of fabrics, spices, or handmade goods like a Persian rug, which you see there. It's right over the back of the camel. So they've already done the trading. They've crossed where from? All the way from usually the coast of China, where the big cities were, all the way across. It's a big country, as big as the U.S., then, including a desert, a big, you have to know what desert, but it's one of the biggest deserts in the world. Then across the Himalayan mountains, of course, on the safest passes, and then all the way into what's now Persia. That's several thousand miles. That is called the Silk Route, if you didn't know that, the Silk Road or Silk Route, because the Chinese were to bring a lot of silk and things that they were good at making to trade for other objects with Persia, or if they went south and with India, or even possibly the Turks. And in some cases, they traded earlier on with the Romans. We know they traded with the Romans because there are Roman coins found all over Egypt. All over China. For hundreds of years, they've been finding them, archaeologists. But this isn't the period we're talking about. We're talking about the Middle Ages, when Europe was literally in the dark ages. I mean, the depths of the most ignorant period in European history, right? Or at least recent history. So what we'd see is two advanced cultures, right? The Muslim empires, Persia was Muslim by this time, and or Turkey, trading their finest goods with the Chinese for their finest goods. And this is what this symbolizes, this traveling group of merchants who've already done their trading, and they're heading back, and they're singing, they entertain themselves because they have weeks, if not months, on this route. They have to pass time. So you see the musical instruments, right? And you could see this man may be singing. He probably is singing. And then the camels joining in with the human performers. It's meant to be whimsical or humorous. By the way, in the museum, I said this earlier, but for extra credit option, if you go to the Asian Museum in San Francisco, Asian Art Museum, it's fascinating. There's a whole room full of these, and they're all different sizes. None of them are life size. That'd be too big. But some of them are about almost half life size. This one is much smaller. This one is about 2 feet tall. It's a good size. These figures, of course, are obviously miniatures, but the overall height of this is about 2 feet. So let's see. Well, let me see. There is one more thing to say about this, about the meaning of this. That camels were, of course, not found all over China, if that's not obvious, but they were in the parts of China where they had to cross the desert. And of course, sometimes they were very valuable animals. They were kept by people in the cities who were traders, like these people, merchants, even if that's not where the camel was native, on the coast of China. So camels became a very, very important part of the culture and the economy, really, mostly part of the economy of this period, the Tang Dynasty. It was a golden age, you could say it that way, literally, a golden age of Chinese culture and art and economic, prosperity. Like I said, it was one of the main periods of their peace and prosperity in ancient Chinese kingdom. And then finally, it was found in a tomb. So this was designed for probably another merchant, a wealthy merchant who may have made those trips themselves, but in any case, would have been someone well off. They couldn't afford it if they weren't fairly wealthy to have this custom made to illustrate some of the perhaps the experiences they themselves had, the travels that they had made, or at least if not themselves, and people that they hired, if they were owning a trading company. After all, they were already around in the ancient world, trading companies. Maybe that person who ordered this and whose tomb it was found in didn't actually make the trip, but quite often they could have as a younger person, and or hire people to go. And so it's meant to be, indicating the quality of life at this period and this particular way of, being prosperous by trading, from their great golden age to the golden age it clearly was of the kingdoms in the Middle East, the Muslim kingdoms like Persia and Turkey. Okay, and so formal analysis. It is balanced, I think, both ways. But there are people who say, well, his head sticking up this good. But to me, the singer that's standing it makes it roughly balanced. But you could argue that it's slightly unbalanced. I just don't see it that way because of the way the head here sticks up and there's nothing sticking up at the rump rear end of the camel. But to me, this roughly balances it out. Top to bottom, I think it's clearly balanced because, if you take this group of figures and then the whole body of the camel and the legs, it's a rough balance both ways. But you could make the case, again, because of the empty space between the legs, if you drew the line further down, that it's more mass above. So you could also say it's somewhat unbalanced toward the top. The rhythm is obvious with the patterns on the Persian rug, the hair on the camel's neck, and the clothing, the heads, hands, arms, and legs of the musicians/merchants there. Superb texture. It's a minor masterpiece here when you look closely on their faces, their headdresses, their beards, the musical instruments, and the camel, of course. All of that is really good texture, very realistic, and it's all done with carved line. Okay. Then for space, as I said, it's a real three-dimensional object, roughly 2 feet high, but there is overlapping for obvious reasons. The clothes overlap the bodies of the merchants or musicians. You could just say musicians here. They're acting like musicians, and their musical instruments overlap the ones that are playing. And then, of course, the rug overlaps the back of the camel. It's pretty easy to say the largest mass is the camel, then the rug, and then the man in the middle standing up. On the rhythm is obvious with the arms. I think I've already said arms, hands, legs, the stripes on the rug here. And then we have, let's see, the colors are cool on most of the clothing of the musicians, although this guy may be black and it just faded. Kind of looks like a cool grayish color. And then the ceramic, the material itself would be warm on the hair, the skin, and of course the camel's body. And then it's alternating warm and cool on this rug. Okay, and then let's see, balance, rhythm. Oh, there's no technique for modeling here. It's just the lighting from the museum. It's on display in the museum. I'm not sure where. Like I said, you can find these kind of figures in China. The Asian Art Museum in downtown San Francisco. Okay, yeah, like I said, the modeling is just the shadows from the museum lighting. I think that's everything. Line is carved, yeah, balance, rhythm. Oh, stable versus dynamic. Again, that's sometimes the last thing I think of. Clearly the body of the camel, I would include the neck and certainly the overall middle portion and the legs are clearly stable. So it's mostly stable, including the rug. But you could make the case that there's a lot of dynamic detail on the musicians, but look at how they're sitting and this man standing, they're upright. So I would say it's more stable overall than dynamic, with dynamic details on the head of the camel, maybe somewhat on the neck, the upper part, and the instruments, and of course the tops of their heads. Okay, so that's it for now. We cut one of the slides, right? So we've done all the 5 must-haves. All right, so I'm going to do the stop share. And since it's almost 7:50, I'm going to take a consensus. I mean, you might need, because if you just got home from work or you got whatever kids or something else you have to focus on here, or you might, some of you want to glance at what the score is in the Warriors playoff game. Do you want to take a full 20-minute break, or is 15 enough? Okay, let's do that. Then let's start again at 10 after. We can still end early though, because I know the second half I can do in about an hour and 10 minutes. So we'll end at least 10 minutes early, maybe even 50. But since it is almost 10 till 7:48 going on 7:49, let's just round it off. There we go. Let's call it 7:50 and we'll start again at 10 after. But you do want to be here for that, because at least one of the slides coming up from Japan will be on the final. All right, let's take a break. See you guys in about 20, 21 minutes. Okay. Okay, there we go. So we're going to now switch to Japanese art before 1300. Or is it? Oh, 1400, sorry. All right, so this is important in context to give. I didn't actually quite do what I usually do with China, but I can segue with this segment. China, I think I've already said it when we talk about India, at the moment is the largest, most populous country in the world, largest population, but only by a hair or by a notch, whatever. I think it's like 1,425,000,000. And there's now, I just looked it up recently, an actual 1.4 billion in India, and they're growing much faster. So they'll become the most populous country within the next few years, which China at the moment is. And China has the same land area we do, almost exactly, very close to the US land area. So it's 4 times as many people. Obviously, that makes China 4 times more crowded. With Japan, our topic for the last part of tonight, it's the same size. The country land area of Japan is about the same as California. And it has about 3.5 times as many people, not quite 130 million. And we're just under, 30, almost 40 million. So it's easy to figure that out. But if it's not obvious, that means that Japan is about 3.5 times as crowded as California is, as crowded as we feel we are sometimes in this state. They are more crowded there. Plus, it's one of those cultures that it was not known to most of the world because they didn't open their doors to travel or trade with other cultures around them for the first few thousand years. And then briefly they did in the Renaissance, i.e. 1600s, when they allowed some Christian missionaries, very limited number, and then they kicked them out. Not long after, maybe a couple of generations. And they closed their doors for the next 200 or 300 years. So really only since the mid-1800s has Japan opened up to the rest of the world. But we know their history because they kept really excellent records. It's one of the world's, of course, most advanced cultures. And it is the 4th, some say, or 5th largest economy in the world. Right now, it's still the US. It will remain so for a while, depending on China's actually in some troubles financially right now, probably at least the next 15, 20 years, but China is growing slightly, well, more than a little faster it was than our economy. So it's 2nd largest. And then actually, I've read some sources say Japan is the 3rd. Anyway, it's probably the 3rd or 4th largest economy for a country with this relatively smaller population than it does either China or the US or India. That's surprising. They're very industrious, is the phrase I always heard used. They also have a very, very illustrious history of visual art. So let's get to the first slide. Actually, I have to pull it up because it's on this list of slides to know here. And that's not slides to know, I meant. There we go. I'll cut at least one of these. So now what we have to do is smaller, right? I'm going to do the screen share. Do it again. And now you should be able to see this. Can everybody see this? Yeah.
again.
Yeah, it says actually it does now. It's gotten a little more user-friendly Zoom. It does actually say that on my screen. Whoa, I did not hit the advanced button there. Okay, this one is our first must-know. I think you'll find this interesting, even if you had no knowledge of Japanese history or art before this. This is the inner shrine, just like it sounds, two words, inner shrine at Ise, I-S-E. It's a small town in, of course, the location is Japan, and the date is 100, or little c, you can say. You can ignore that, but it means approximately 100. Common error. Okay. Sorry, I had a little problem with acid reflux after Thanksgiving dinner my daughter cooked, and she went all out. I'm afraid there's too much of some of that food isn't always good for you. So I didn't need to drink water more often than I usually do. So you'll hear that as we go. All right, so what are we looking at? We're looking actually, the actual date of this is actually only about 20 years old, but we give you the date of the original structure. Stockstead does, and I agree with that, because here's the fact you should know. This is a small Buddhist temple, Japanese, of course, Buddhist temple. There are slight differences between Japanese Buddhism and other Buddhism. We'll talk about that as we go through the slides. So it's a small Japanese Buddhist temple in a fishing village, a village on the coast of Japan, which was originally built in the first version of it in 100 AD. And then it has been dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. That's literally the most important fact about it, and the only way to say it. Completely dismantled and rebuilt, from the ground up every 20 years for, what is that, almost 2,000 years. Now, why are they doing that? What a waste of energy and resources. No, there's a good reason for why they do that. It's because doing the recreation, the rebuilding, you could say, or reconstruction, actually the right word is reconstruction of this temple once every generation, at least that's roughly what they mean when they say every 20 years, is an exercise in teaching the values of Buddhism, which is balance again in all things in life and helping other people. Two of the main principles of Buddhism: to have balance in your life, to achieve enlightenment through balance. You don't get greedy, you don't get violent, you don't try to dominate other people. Okay? So the two main principles, I mean, there are several, right? But the two main, that this building event, it's an event, the whole village participates every 20 years, symbolizes are the two main, two of the main, not the two, there's only two principles in all of Buddhism, hardly. So two of the main principles are balance in all things, in society, right? The society is the village. I don't know how many, it's probably several hundred people, maybe a couple thousand in a small village. The balance in that community, right? If I say society, it sounds like we're talking about a whole country, but say in that community, there's a balance. And I'll say how that is carried out in a minute. And the other thing is the other principle that of Buddhism that this act symbolizes is caring for other people. Okay, so how does that work? Well, first of all, everybody participates in that process every 20 years, young and old. There's your balance in age. Men and women, your balance in gender, right? Or at least, traditional, right? Men and women, young and old, rich and poor. You don't get an exemption unless you're disabled. Then of course you would, or very, very young, but they even have toddlers participate in ways that they're capable of. And elderly people, if they're not physically disabled, help with some part of the process, doesn't matter what the details are, because there's a lot of tasks. Because why? This is a wooden building with a thatched roof and with Buddhist religious decorations, or you can say icons actually, inside relics, there we go, or icons. So there's a lot of course, some of the relics are just set aside and then re-enter the building, right, when they finish the new version. But they also add new ones. So there's a lot of tasks. Skilled labor is involved. And so the whole village participates. They do it in one season, a few months, because they want the temple to be there when the winter weather arrives for people to go inside and worship. So that's a balance of age, of occupations, of wealth or poverty, or you could say, means, people's levels in society, their means. You don't get an exemption just because you're a wealthy landowner or because you're poor, and then of genders. So everyone participates in the process. But then the other part of this is that the bottom floor, right, the first level, is a grain storage, whatever, space, which we'll just say grain storage. And that's there because the village takes care of its own, as was, of course, originally taught by Buddha, that you don't let anyone go hungry, or, you do the right action, right? And the right thought and the right attitude of helping people when they need it. So if someone loses their crop, they have a death in the family, an illness, become disabled, then they can get, the village elders will determine what's fair. They will get enough food to get through that period from the grain storage in the bottom level of this temple. So that's providing for each other, or taking care of each other. I think you get the idea. It's a really unusual exercise, a symbolic exercise in teaching by hands-on tasks the concepts, two of the main concepts of Buddhism. But the last part of the meaning is, what style is it? It's Shinto Buddhist. Now, early Shinto Buddhist, I should say. Japanese, Shinto, you may know that word, some of you, is a Japanese version of Buddhism, which is more simplistic, or believes, I don't mean that their beliefs are more simple, but they say their lives should be, and the lifestyle, including their buildings, should reflect the concept of the simplest and most closest to earth. Well, the building is made out of trees that are right around this, you can see in the forest around there. And this is sand, by the way, it's right on the edge of the water. And then the thatch is, of course, dried grass. Everyone knows what thatch is, right? If not, you should write that. Thatched roof. It's all natural materials taken from the local environment and all handmade. And there are no excessive decorations. There are colors. I don't have a color photo. I looked for one. I couldn't find one that was good, sharp, and clear, full view. These beams up here are painted bright colors. So there is that much decoration here. But basically, it's a functional building. It's structurally logically designed to reflect the function of the building. There is no superfluous, right, or unnecessary ornament on the exterior, at least perhaps on the interior, but not on the exterior. So that fits with the simple concept, or the concept of Shinto Buddhism, which emphasizes simplicity in your life and therefore in your surroundings. Right. So I think you get that. It's pretty impressive that they keep doing this every 20 years. All right. Formal analysis. Well, it's a black and white photo, so I just have to tell you, it's all warm. The walls are a yellow pine, quite literally yellow wood. The beams here are a little darker, but wood is always warm, right? So they're kind of a somewhat light brownish or tan color. And then the roof, well, I think everybody knows what thatch looks like. If not, it's the same color as hay. Hay is basically the same thing as thatch, right? Dried grass. And obviously that's a gold color, right? And that's warm. So it's all warm colors. Textures are all the real textures. There's no symmetric textures. They're real smooth, and it is polished or sanded. They use the word polished to imply that, smooth surfaces on the wood. So sanded or polished wood. The walls, the beams, and the posts. These are not columns. They're not columns. These are not decorative or symbolic. They're functional. So these posts, all of the exterior of the building is smooth, real wood textures and rough, real thatch or grass on the roof. The largest mass, I'd say it is the roof. If you look at how wide, those are your eaves overhanging, right? So it could almost be a pagoda, but don't make that mistake. It's not multi-story. It's really one story where you climb up in the back, a short flight of stairs to get in the main level. And then the grain storage area is not even a full story. So it's not a pagoda. It's a temple. It's a Buddhist temple. The rhythm is obvious with the posts and the eaves of the roof, identical shapes. And of course, these beams that they actually hold the roof down. The thatched roof is held in place with heavy beaming. All that's repeated shapes. The line here is visual. There's no carved or drawn line around the corners here, of course, in the edges of the roof line. And the modeling is, of course, the natural shadows from the sun. The rhythm is obvious. I think I already said the beams, these, right? Oh, it's dynamic only on the roof. Everything else is stable. The walls, the actual structure itself, right? The walls and these posts, the balconies, or even these beams, the roof beams. And these underlying, projecting wooden beams, in that sense, it's similar to pagoda. That's all stable, so it's mostly stable, but the roof is dynamic, obviously. The largest mass, I think I already said, is, well, I didn't break it down. It would be the roof, then the main, right, room, the worship area. Just say the main floor. And then the third largest, pretty obviously, is the grain storage. The modeling is just the natural shadows from the sun. It's balanced, completely symmetrical, but it depends from left to right, of course. But whether or not you count this as the midline. The eaves are slightly wider, but not by much, than the balconies here. So you could say it's almost roughly balanced if you do the line in a certain place, left to right. Let's see, color, line, visual, texture, stable, balance, mass. I think we covered it all. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, this one is very interesting too. This is the Buddhist temple at Nara, N-A-R-A. Buddhist, you remember that's B-U-D-D-H-I-S-T. You know, we spelled that last week when we talked about the origins of Buddha in India, or Buddhism. Buddhist temple at Nara, N-A-R-A, Japan, 607. This is all common error. This is a retreat, a rural mountain retreat. It's been functioning since 700 AD. Now, are all the buildings in this photo, or even any of them, really that old? Well, there's some debate, but the pagoda is probably the oldest building, and therefore is most likely the one that does go back that far. Well, that's a long time. That's what, 13 centuries. So what's the purpose of this retreat? Well, it's a Japanese Buddhist, right, retreat in the mountains, so that people who wanted to reach enlightenment or to try and achieve enlightenment could get away from all the noise and distraction of the big city. And you might laugh at 700 AD. Well, actually, there were already some big cities in Japan, not as big as they are now, or anywhere else in the world that has big cities. So, but they were, you know, like there was no Tokyo, that wasn't around yet, but there was Yokohama and some of the other older, just say there were several larger cities where the populations were crowded, of course, and therefore the lifestyle was more distracting than the Buddhist lifestyle that Buddha taught you should strive for in order to work towards or strive during your lifetime to achieve enlightenment. We already covered what that is, the Eightfold Path I gave you last week. You do need to know that. It's on that recording that I posted, which is having, you know, under India, slides of India where Buddhism started. The 5 of those 8 paths you need to remember. So if you want to achieve enlightenment, in other words, from the, you know, following the teachings of Buddha, you get away from the big towns or cities and live in a retreat. But you didn't just come and like vacation. Oh, no. You worked every day. You were expected to contribute to your own food, your own clothes making, and all of the tasks, woodworking, carpentry, you know, tasks, you know, maintenance, cleaning, fishing or hunting if they were eating meat, and if they weren't, then of course farming or a combination of those. So you really had to work to maintain your self and help the others that lived here. So people shared the task. Again, the balance concept of Buddhism in helping others was symbolized by the activities at this retreat. This pagoda, I think I have another view of it. Let's see. Yeah, I do. Isn't that neat? That's the oldest structure, and you see it fits the definition of a pagoda. The wide overhanging eaves and the projecting wooden brackets. So that's the tallest structure and the oldest in this compound. Probably goes back to the original founding of it. So by the time this retreat, whoops, went too far. By the time this retreat was founded, Buddhism had already become the dominant religion had been the dominant religion in Japan for several centuries. We just saw a building from 100 AD, 600 years earlier. That was the one that we just saw, the inner shrine in Ise. And this is still relatively simple, although the beams get kind of ornate. And as Shinto Buddhism, as time went on, Shinto Buddhism would have the style of their buildings, of their, pagodas and their temples would have gotten more ornate. I said that once, I think, the beginning of this class. I hope I did. I try to say it in every class. It's a traditional human behavior. I mean, it's a classic human thing that when you start out with the simplest things, like pioneer architecture from the early gold rush or the earliest, housing in really early ancient times in the Middle East or in the early Roman and Greek empires. That they would be simpler, plainer in the earliest periods of those cultures. And then as you get a few centuries later or decades or whatever, later on in that same culture, then the style of their architecture specifically, but also their visual arts to some degree, but especially in like painting, but particularly in architecture, it is a truism. It's a rule of thumb, you could say, for almost all human cultures, that the later in a period of a given culture, the more ornate the architecture gets. And you'll see the evidence of that. We already see this is more ornate. I'll give you the close-up again on these 5 levels of this pagoda than the Shinto Buddhist shrine we saw the first slide. Okay, and so it's a compound where things are, for instance, this is the temple for the worship. This is a residence, like a dormitory. This is the dining commons here. This might be some kind of offices or workshop. And around here is probably some more, skilled laboring crafts and things that are housed here with tools and things. That you don't have to know the details of what buildings or what, except that this is the pagoda, the temple. And it includes, you can just say, it's this compound, living quarters, dining commons, or building a dining hall, if you want to say that way, and workshops of all kinds, as well as some kind of administrative offices. It had to be run by the head priests here. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning. So here we have, I'm going to just say, let's just analyze one of the buildings, and that would be the main temple, the pagoda. For space, that's a good 100 feet, easily, more like 120, in fact, including the finial. I did tell you the word finial is useful. That's a finial. We saw some on stupas in India last week. So it's a 5-story building that reaches a height of nearly 100 feet, and with the spire closer to 130 or over 120 feet to the top. And each of the floors, we'll take a look at the close-up of it, has about the same height here, although the ground floor is usually a little higher than the others. So it's 5 rooms for the upper floor, the upper 4 floors have about equal height. The ceilings are about 15 feet high in each of these sections. And the ground floor is probably closer to 20 feet. And then the finial is about 30 feet. So that's the real space. Okay, but here's the view you'd have. Of course, the colors, you can't see much of the walls. So you just have to say that the wooden walls, the wooden beamings, overhanging beams, and the walls are a warm color, of course, wood always is. And there's only 2 main colors. All the roofs are cool bluish tile. That's very popular in Asia. I don't know why they don't use red clay tile. Could be about the chemicals in their earth where they make the tile. Virus protections. No, thank you. Not right now. Let's hope I don't need them. All right. And then the rhythm is obvious. The repeated shapes of the overhangs, these eaves, I should say, rather eaves that overhang on the 5 floors of this pagoda. The textures are the real rough texture of wood and real smooth texture. I guess I already said that of the clay tile. No, I was talking about the colors. Yeah. So the textures are not simulated, just rough wood and real, you can't see the windows from here, real smooth clay tile. Okay, and then we have obviously the rhythm, the repeated shapes of the overhanging eaves, and you can't see the beams, but you know there are beams that have the same shape here, and all of the roof lines here of the 5 main buildings overhanging the eaves all have the same basic repeated shapes, right? The largest mass, well, in this case, you'd have to say it's the residential quarters, the living quarters, and then it's the close call, probably the pagoda, the temple, and then the dining common. The shadows are the natural shadows created by the sunlight. The lines here, there are carved lines, but you can't really see them on the beams. You can just write it that way, that the beams have some carved line. Otherwise, it's the edges of the roof lines and the corners that create the visual line, of course. Okay, color, texture, balance. Yes, each structure is symmetrical, absolutely. And I would say both top to bottom and left to right. And yeah, the walls are stable and the roof lines are dynamic on all the buildings. All right, so we're doing pretty well on time here. Now that's a different pagoda, and it's interesting because it's not on the must-know list, but it's a little bit later Shinto, but you're going to see the next must-know is really a clear example of that trend where you get more innate the later a building is in a given period or style. This is moving in towards a latter medieval era. We remember the word medieval, I said this last week, is used throughout the world to just designate or connotate, you know, the relative time frame. When we say medieval in Europe, it was a very specific meaning. But when we talk about China, India, Japan, whatever, we're just talking about the years, the same years that overlap with the terms in that period of European history. So this is one from the mid-medieval period, and therefore it's not early Shinto. And you could see it's more ornate on these, right? These walls. Look at the intricate wooden patterns here. Now this is later; these were added later. But even the overhanging, right, roof with but the beams are too. You see that they're multi-level beams, multi-layer beams, I guess you could say. Okay, let's go to our next must-know. And I'm going to ask: is anybody here? I think I know the answer. I think 1 or 2 people said they've been to Hawaii in your mini bios, but has anybody here been to this shrine? It's just outside the city of Honolulu. Actually, it's well into the countryside, so it's not like it's the suburb. It's about 15 miles, maybe a little further from the edge of Honolulu's a big city, right? It's nearly 1 million people, the metropolitan area. But this is totally unique. There's nothing like it. Has anybody been to this? It's a Shinto Buddhist shrine out in the countryside of Hawaii. Not this one, but the exact replica down to every detail, including the golden statue of Buddha inside the main, right, pagoda here. Nobody's been there? Oh, well, apparently 500,000, oh, no more than that, probably 1 million tourists a year go there. So this is the original from which the model of it was made.
I do have a question.
Pardon? Have you been there?
No, I do have a question. Why
Sure.
why they built a replica there?
A replica in Hawaii? I'll explain. That's a good question. Excellent. You'll get that in the information on the meaning. But first, let me give you the title. There is a good reason, and I think it's very moving. You know what I mean by moving, touching? Well, that sounds corny. It's a statement of how, again, Buddhism and other, of course, not only Buddhism, but many other of the world's, you know, potentially healing philosophies or religions can bring people together? I'll explain in a minute. So good question. Hold that question, hold that thought until we get to the notes on the meeting. But first, the title of this is Byodo In. I know that's funny. It's 2 words hyphenated. Byodo-in, not as in like a place. It's the name of it in Japanese, Byodo In. In parentheses is part of the title. In English, it's Phoenix, like the city, yes, in Arizona, or the bird. That's what it's relating to, the bird that rises from the ashes, right? Phoenix Hall, Phoenix, Phoenix Hall, Japan. The original is from Japan, 1053. Now, this is mid-medieval Shinto Buddhist retreat in rural Japan. This is the real thing we're looking at. But I guess you'd really want to hear why, rather than wait till the end, why there's a replica in Hawaii, because of Pearl Harbor. And you might say because of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Here's what happened. After World War II, the very pacifist, and they are, you know this, the Japanese government today, since World War II, has been pacifist. It's in their constitution. So the pacifist government of Japan wanted to make a gesture to offer their regrets for Pearl Harbor. I mean, after all, that is what started the war between the US and Japan, right? Literally, there's no other word for it. It was a sneak attack. Well, they decided that they would do something with more meaning than just an apology, right? Like so many other countries and parts of our culture sometimes have done. They decided that wasn't enough. So they paid to have a replica of this entire Buddhist Shinto shrine. Well, it's not more a shrine, it's a compound recreated in Hawaii, almost exactly. I think it was opened in the 20th anniversary. 25th, it would have been 25th anniversary, 25 years after Pearl Harbor. It was opened in the mid 60s, and it's been there ever since. And it's one of the most popular tourist sites for those that don't only go to the beach. It's not my scene. I just sunburn every time I'm out in the sun more than 10 minutes. So I know that's what most people do. They don't even go to parts of Honolulu. But if you ever do, I would visit, because the replica of it isn't even, of course, it's only a few decades, not centuries old. It's in excellent condition, and it's a beautiful setting, just like this. They recreated the setting and everything. It's their way of, you could say, atoning. And then, of course, when you think about it, after all, it was received by who was then governor of Hawaii, and might even have been the U.S. government representatives, with gracious appreciation, because, of course, they suffered in that war. In the end, they suffered more than we did, obviously. But it's just touching to say, this is our peace offering to a country that we once attacked and want to be friends with. And then, of course, Japan is one of our biggest allies right now. It has been ever since the end of World War II. Okay, so it's a gesture of goodwill and a Buddhist thought, the concept that make peace with people around you, including those that were once your enemy. An interesting concept we don't see enough of in the world today. Okay, so let's go back to that's part, you could say that's part of the meaning, because there is a replica of it. But the main facts now on this slide are what I'm about to tell you. This is a self-contained community, just like the one at Nara, same idea. And with being Buddhist, they didn't just invite people to come. Oh, you could spend a month, a weekend, whatever, take a week off from your job. No, you would have, of course, come here to seek enlightenment, and you were expected to become part of the community and work every day to help with creating, food. You might, for instance, the ponds, the one in Japan, it's the same thing. The fish around here are restocked. I don't even know how they do that. I'm not sure, but in other words, they don't overfish. But you might provide food from fishing in the waters around this compound. Possibly some other types of hunting, but certainly growing your own food. They would be expected to participate. Sorry, there we go, in the farming of all kinds of, obviously vegetables and fruits. And then you also would help with making your own clothes and with the maintenance of the buildings, the repairs, or even, ceremonies, religious ceremonies. So it's an active, ongoing, self-supporting community formed as a rural retreat for people who want to achieve enlightenment through teachings of Buddha or Buddhism. And it is Shinto. It's mid medieval Shinto Buddhism, which is the more ornate, the later you get. The more late, the more ornate. Okay, look at that. Look at these beams here. And there's even dragons at the end. See them? The heads of dragons at the end of these roof tiles here, these long rows. These are purely decorative. There's nothing functional here. And then Phoenix, right? Phoenix, the birds that rise from the ashes. So it may have replaced some building that burned, or just maybe, you don't have to write this part though. I'm not certain of this. Why it's called Phoenix Hall, the translation in English. It could have something to do with rebirth of your spirit. I think that's the reason, or your soul and your life. If you were following the teachings of Buddha and you finally achieve, obviously enlightenment, you would feel somewhat refreshed or reborn spiritually. It's a beautiful structure, isn't it? Now, a statue of Buddha seated would be in the main pagoda, because there's more than one pagoda here. This is the largest one, but this is actually the tallest. I think it's 4 levels. When I was there, I was visiting there. I didn't want to leave. It was so neat, but I had a rental car, and I was a guest of the Hawaiian State Tourism Office. Don't ask me how I arranged that, but it was one of my favorite trips. They provided everything. And I kept telling the driver, can you just wait a little longer? I don't want to leave this place. It's so beautiful, the exact replica of it. You can look it up online, just outside Honolulu, on Oahu, of course, the main island of Hawaii. But this one is out in the countryside of the mainland of Japan. Japan's a bunch of islands, you know that, right? The main island is where Tokyo is, and that's where this is. All right, and then the last part of the meaning is that you could go in here to worship. You didn't have to be a member of the community or live there to go worship. If you were traveling, you could be welcomed overnight, and they would provide you food and things, much as I said with the other pagoda slides that we've seen. The monks could provide that for you, but you would probably want to join the prayers inside the main pagoda, where there is a large golden statue of Buddha seated on a lotus leaf. That's the very different image of Buddha than the standing Buddhas that we saw last week, right, in India and Cambodia, or Southeast Asia. So this is the later version of Buddha, who was meant to help inspire people who saw the statues of him to achieve enlightenment. But when you get to this period, the mid and later medieval period of Buddhist temples, then the figure of Buddha, is usually so seated and often painted in gold. The one here was, I assume it's exactly the same as the one in Japan, seated, right, with his legs crossed. Of course, you've seen these images on a giant lotus leaf. Okay, that's the full meaning here on this. And then we would do the formal elements here. Just a second, I need to take one more quick swig of water here. All right, so the largest mass, it's a close call here because this is the largest of the pagodas. It's really not quite 3 levels, but I walked up to the top because, again, the replica of it is identical. So I know that's exactly what this was like. There is a 3rd level here, but the eaves only overhang the bottom 2 floors. This one is 4 levels. So which is the larger mass? From having been there, I'd say it's the main pagoda, the one in the center of this photo. Then the tallest were 4-story pagoda. And then both of these are about the same size, but this one here is slightly wider. So you could say the building, this is not a pagoda. This is not a temple. This would have been living quarters or a workhouse. I can't remember which. So that'd be the 3rd largest mass, the building in the lower right or far right end of this photo. The rhythm should be obvious with the posts, the wide overhanging eaves, the projecting wooden beams. And yes, that is half timbering, just like Elizabethan or Tudor houses in England from the 1500s, just the same exact technique. It's interesting how people all around the world arrive with the same solution to certain building problems or structures. Half timbering, that's literally what it is. There's no other word for that. So these half timbers here help support the walls, of course, and then there's plaster in between them, of course. Maybe now it's sheetrock in the one in Japan, in Hawaii, I don't know. But anyway, that would originally been plaster at the walls. They have to keep maintaining them, of course. So that creates rhythm. the timbering in the walls. The colors, almost all of the, well, no, sorry, I almost misspoke. All the woodwork is, of course, the wooden beaming, the posts, the timber framing, and the underhanging of the eaves. That's all warm colors. But then the wall, the plaster painted white, of course, on the main walls everywhere, and the bluish tile, again, is always the case with Buddhist temples, is all cool. Textures, the real smooth texture on the tile and the real smooth texture on the plaster on the walls. And then all the woodwork, of course, is all real rough texture. Here, the lines are visual, but not just at the corners or underneath each eave. That's all the visual lines are obvious. But here you have the visual line continues on the walls because of the timbering. The right word is half, two words, half timber, but you can just say timbering. And then we have the modeling, of course, is the deep shadows created by the overhanging eaves and the covered walkways from the sun, the natural modeling. For space, you have multi-level buildings. You have a three-level building, the main pagoda, with a large open room, and that ceiling is well over, it's got to be close to 20 feet here. And then the upper ceiling here is not quite as tall. It's about 12 feet, and then this is about another. So it's altogether about 45 feet from the ground to the top of the roof. But this pagoda is a little taller, so that's at least 50 or a little over 50 feet. And those are, each level is one large open room on these three levels. Obviously, this room is smaller. So if you want to say, is it balanced? Well, no, it's unbalanced toward the bottom because obviously the eaves overhanging here, you can make the case it's unbalanced at the top, but if you're looking at the space, the actual spaces, this is the smallest room, the third largest, and then the bottom room is the largest. So in terms of the room or actual space, these are three rooms in the main pagoda, with the largest one being down on the ground floor, and then four levels, equal levels on this taller pagoda. Let's see, is there carved line, painted line, balanced, rhythm? I think I mentioned, yeah, stable. Oh yeah, last thing, it's dynamic, obviously on all the roof lines everywhere, including the decorative tile animals, the phoenixes and the dragon heads, and dynamic pretty much everywhere else on the posts and the main walls. Okay, we're doing quite well on time. Oh, I forgot I had this. Yeah, I looked this up recently. There you go. That's the statue of Buddha that's inside both the original one in Japan and the replica outside of Honolulu in Hawaii. Yeah, look how ornate it is. And I think you can tell it's.
What is the material?
Pardon?
Material.
It's metal, gilded, right, covered in gold. I think it's a very strong metal. I'm not sure. They didn't have steel that far back, so I'm not sure. Some kind of iron or tin. It's hard to say. Tin, of course, would be thin, but it's probably some kind of cast iron. Then covered in gold. Yes, what looks like gold here. Let's get up close. You see how it's wearing off here on his cheek. And then this is also metal. That's wrought by hand. You know the difference between wrought and cast, right? Cast iron is in a mold. Wrought iron is done all by hand. And you see he's sitting on a giant lotus leaf. Well, it almost looks more like an artichoke. I'm sorry. My friends, Buddhist friends, I have quite a few, would say, what? Well, it does look like an artichoke when you're getting ready to peel it and open up and eat it. Anyway, no, it's supposed to be a lotus leaf, giant lotus leaf. And he's sitting cross-legged with this wonderful contemplative expression on his face. He's in a meditative state, right? Always these Buddhas inside. Well, and even the small ones they sell as souvenirs to tourists on Grand Avenue in Chinatown are similar to that in that regard. Though often they're smiling and laughing. That's not very authentic in some of the tourist versions. But this is more the classic pose of Buddha in the mid-medieval and late medieval temples all over Asia. And I love this ornate decorative pattern. It's not exactly obvious what it's supposed to symbolize. It looks like plants. But they didn't always have that. It's almost like a shield behind him. It's not a halo, though. It's too big for that, which you did see on some of these standing Buddhas last week. But his position, his pose, I should say, is pretty classic. But you don't have to write that because you can't see it from the slide. So if it's on the exam, this is the only view you'll have to write about. Okay, moving on. Let's see how we're doing here. I'm going to go ahead to, yeah. Oh, this is my favorite page. This has very high possibility. I would even say probability. Yes, it would have high probability of being on the final. And it's Kuya preaching, 2 words. Kuya is the name of this Shinto Buddhist monk. Kuya, K-U-Y-A, preaching. The artist, we know his name, Kosho, K-O-S-H-O. And the little c, again, you can always ignore that on any date. It means we don't have the exact year about, so you could just say 1200. So this is a Shinto, it's an accurate render, you would say statue or image, right? Accurate statue or image of a famous Shinto Buddhist monk named Kuya. And there's one more new definition or term to know that goes together with this slide from your list of terms. But first, let's say who Kuya was. Well, he was a very devout, you can use, or devoted, you could just say devoted, follower of Buddhism, but he also taught a version of it, a type of Shinto. So it's not just Shinto Buddhism or Buddhism in general, it's Pure Land Buddhism. That's a Japanese concept that didn't appear in other Buddhist cultures or countries. So what does that mean? It's your last definition. So here we go. Pure Land Buddhism. It's on your list of terms to know. It's the last one for tonight. Second from the top on that same page below pagoda, right? Pure Land Buddhism. It's a form of Shinto Buddhism that was came from Japan. It actually did spread a little bit outside, like to Korea, I think, but you can just say it came from Japan, comma, okay, which taught that there was a pure land or better place where people could go after they died if they followed faithfully the teachings of Buddha. Now, I'll just repeat that again slowly. Again, Pure Land Buddhism was a form of Shinto Buddhism from Japan, comma, which taught that there was a better place or pure land, that's where the title comes from, in whatever the Japanese phrase for that is, literally translated, a better place or a pure land where people could go after they died if they followed faithfully the teachings of Buddha. Well, now, does that sound familiar? It's almost exactly the same concept.
Like heaven?
Yeah, exactly. Very similar. It's not typical of Buddhism. I have friends who debate this. I've seen them do it, in rooms with people where they were, all in, basically the Buddhist philosophy, and me and a couple other people who weren't would just listen. Is Buddhism a religion or is it not? Is it a philosophy or is it more than that? Is it just a way of life? Or is it an actual deep spiritual concept? Yeah, it's all the above. Buddhism is harder to categorize than the other main religions like Hinduism and Islam and Judaism and Christianity. So yeah, here's how you can write it, because it's very similar to the concept, the Christian concept of heaven, very similar. And it wasn't taught in most parts of the Buddhist cultures, but it was in Japan, and then briefly, or not briefly, but it did spread a little bit outside Japan, like Korea, for example. The reason I know it was taught in Korean societies is because I went to a Shinto Buddhist, I think I mentioned this to you. It's called Nichiren Shoshu, and don't write this. But I went to I think I mentioned this, a large group of people chanting all at the same time. And that's what he's doing. So now you do need to write this part. Why do we see miniature figures of Buddha, 6 of them, coming out of his mouth? Because they symbolize the rhythmic that's the right way to write it, chant that he used to gather people to listen to his teachings about Buddhism. He would repeat every village he went to, he would stop, bang his drum. You see that there? That's a drum, right? Or gong. It's hard to say if it's a drum, it's probably a drum. And then start chanting to get people to gather around him. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. I can't even do it very fast, especially with my scratchy throat. But if you get doing that really loud, a room full of people, you get a natural high. But he just did it by himself, and his voice was so strong, and he was so famous. He was very famous throughout
Are
Japan.
those beards or what are
Sorry?
those?
Say,
The things coming out of his
yeah,
mouth.
there's supposed to be different syllables of a chant that he would be making. Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. I won't try to sing it because I don't have a good singing voice. Over and over, but in a chant. He'd do that until he himself got into a natural high, and the people around him, hearing him do that, would know, oh, that's Kuya. Let's go listen to him. It's that famous Buddhist priest, Shinto priest. He's going to tell us how to have a better life and how to go to a better place when we die. So he was very influential, in other words, famous. There are all kinds of portraits of him, but this is considered the most accurate. Done probably by someone from a sketch while he was alive, you know. Anyway, he went all over Japan preaching this version of Buddhism called Pure Land Buddhism, which is a specific category of Shinto Buddhism. And he would chant that thing, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. I can almost do it over and over and over for I don't know how long it took to gather a crowd. And then he'd start preaching. So this is him gathering a crowd. It's fascinating, I think. And he's standing on, most people think it's a book. Some say, no, it's just a wooden platform. I think it's a book of Buddhist prayers. And that's what I believe, at least the edition I have of Stockstead. It's several years old. They don't give us a free edition as teacher's editions anymore. They used to. But just say many people believe, or historians believe, that would be symbolic of the Buddhist prayers, which of course were kept in the temples for the priests, the Buddhist priests to, or monks, you could use either word, to read, you know, before they conducted a ceremony. So that may be what the platform or base he's standing on is. But we do know what this symbolizes. I've already mentioned the drum, the chants symbolized by the 6 figures of Buddha coming out of his mouth. But this symbolizes Buddha's famous incident in his, I didn't mention it before, in his youth, he shot a deer and immediately regretted, in fact, even mourned the loss of that deer. And that's when he started thinking he shouldn't be a prince anymore or stay in his father's palace. He should wander freely and leave his father's wealthy, you know, home and become enlightened. So it's the beginning of his quest, symbolic of the beginning of Buddha's quest for enlightenment when he left his father's home after killing a deer and feeling remorse for that. So you see what it is? It's a walking stick he carved into the shape of an antler, of a deer's antlers. Okay, and then the clothing is fascinating. This is so detailed. It's remarkable. Every detail of his body, you know, the way his face looked, his normal ears, not like Buddha's ears where they, you know, supposedly hung down with long earlobes, but normal human ears, and his clothing and the details of the hammer he uses to strike the, either, again, we don't know, is it a drum or a gong? You could say either. Even the way the walking stick is carved, and his bare, well, his feet, actually, I think he had sandals. Yeah, he did. He had sandals. He could have walked all over rural Japan with bare feet. That would gotten, although supposedly Buddha did in India. In any case, so every detail from his feet, his head to his feet is very realistic. So let's do the formal analysis. That's carved line that creates this realistic cement textures on his face, his hands, his clothing, his feet, and his walking stick. The largest mass, easy. Him, then I'd say it's a close call, the base, and then the walking stick probably. For space, it's about an 18-inch tall figure. There were many of these made of him. Portraits of him were so famous, so popular. So they would be anywhere from 18 inches to 2 feet. This is probably somewhere in between. So say it's at least 18 inches or between 1.5 and 2 feet. That's close. But there is the technique, obviously, for space of overlapping. Pretty much everyone knows by now how that works, but here we go. The clothes overlapping his body, his hands overlapping his stick and his hammer there, and his feet overlapping the base. And then we have the colors that actually, here they look neutral because it's been painted, but originally it was probably warm. You see a warm kind of a wood color. This is wood, by the way. So there's the real texture of the wood, but you don't really see that. So you don't have to write that in your notes on the textures. But when it was new, it may or may not have been painted. This could have been done hundreds of years later, the black paint, but now it's mostly a neutral black color with a little bit of warm showing through. And on the base, you've got both. On the top, it's a black neutral, and on the side, a warm tannish color. Okay, and then we have, let's see, the textures of the real rough texture of cloth on his robes, and the smooth textures, and also real rough texture of wood on his walking stick, and smooth texture, realistic again, of similar texture of his skin. And I would say on this drum, it's smooth, and the metal hammer he uses. Okay, and it's almost all stable. He's walking upright, and he's holding a walking stick, and the base is definitely stable. And it's balanced, definitely, from left to right, and top to bottom, as most figures would be, intact human bodies would be. And the only modeling is the shadows from the museum lighting. This is in a museum somewhere in, I believe, Japan. Okay, so we're doing well on time. Let's see, let's see how it goes. This one I won't cut. I might cut the very last one, but let's see what the time is like. We're finished with this one. So here we go. This is the fifth slide listed for tonight, second from the bottom. Night attack on Sanjo Palace. Night attack on Sanjo, that's Sanjo Palace, Japan, 1275. Okay, so what are we looking at? We're looking at a classic example of Japanese print art or print style art. What does that mean? Well, there are three things about this print that mark it as a classic example of Japanese print style, which goes back obviously centuries to the Middle Ages. First of all, the oblique angle. There's no other word for it. Oblique. Again, if you're writing it correctly, you don't spell it like the vegetable. It's not B-L-E-E-K. It's O-B-L-I-Q-U-E, of course. Oblique or odd or diagonal. There's different ways of saying it, but the right word is oblique angles. Everything is shown at an unusual angle, and that's classically Japanese. They still do that in some parts of Japanese printmaking. I don't know if they do that with anime art, whatever it's called. But definitely classical traditional Japanese prints, whether they're a landscape or a cityscape or a group portrait, if there's any perspective, any angles, they're all at a sharp diagonal. That's what we mean by oblique angle. There's no other way to really say that in one phrase. The oblique angle is basic to all Japanese prints. It's kind of unique to Japanese art, although there are plenty of painters in the 1800s in Europe, the Impressionists, who imitated this style, that technique, at least I should say. Then another feature that marks the classic Japanese is bold outlines, right, around the main figures, right, with a geometric kind of a pattern in the repeated shapes. That's supposed to be flames. There's a fire. The palace is burning. It's been successfully attacked by an enemy army. And we'll say more about that in a minute. But these are what mark this classic Japanese art. The fire is created with, you can see when you get up close, it's not very realistic at all when you really examine it thoroughly, but at a distance, it looks almost like, you might think flames billowing smoke and flames would look. And so that is actually a series of geometric patterns that are repeated. And those are classically Japanese, to have somewhere in the background. And here that is, of course, in the upper right half of the painting. Okay, and then so, bold geometric patterns somewhere in the background of Japanese prints are always present. And then the bold outlines I already mentioned, you only see them around the main objects, for instance, around the roof here, and to some degree on these. There's a dead soldier here, and then also on these attacking right cavalry right here, and then also on the roof line here. So it's not everywhere. In fact, most of the lines on the soldiers that are attacking are thin, but the main objects that they want you to emphasize on the palace itself that's burning, and the most recent attacking cavalry there, soldiers on horseback, the lines there are bold. And on this recently deceased enemy soldier. So that's the other part of the meaning. The first part of meaning, is about the style. The other part is what's happening here. It's an attack during the warlord era. Some of you may know this. Japan went through a period where warlords, that is local, regional rulers, that's the easiest way, they were called shoguns. Some of you know that word, right? Shogun, S-H-O-G-U-N. Local or regional rulers were attacking each other, warring. There was a period of for centuries, actually went on and off, not nonstop, but for several centuries, there were long periods in what we call the mid to late Middle Ages, right? From around this time, of course, with this being as it would be late medieval, all the way into the 1700s. So for several centuries, from the mid medieval period all the way through into the 1700s, there was on and off chaos, wars between different local rulers. They always had a hired army, mercenaries, of course, the other word for that. And that's what we see here, a hired army or a bunch of mercenary soldiers attacking an enemy warlord and defeating them. And of course, burning the palace to the ground. So that's why it's called Attack on Sanjo Palace. So this was a period of, political instability and suffering by the average population, and even sometimes starvation, because we see that happening in Ukraine right now, leaves all kinds of victims, of course, in its wake, always does, especially when it's deliberate. And that's what this was, is a period where the warlords ruled over big chunks of Japan, in fact, most of the countryside, and maybe not in the big cities, but in most provinces in Japan, there was at least a couple of warring warlords who would fight for with each other, for control. And the people that suffered were the peasants and the average, citizens. The loss of food, loss of homes, right, and even their lives, of course. So there was also not just the violence, but hunger and homelessness were created by these periods of warlord battles throughout Japan. And they didn't really stop until the 1700s. And then the central government got an upper hand and was able to clamp down on the warlords. Okay, let's do a formal analysis. And then I think, I promised we'd end early, so I'll probably, but don't put your syllabi away yet. I'm going to probably cut the last one, but let's just wrap this one up with the formal elements. Is it balanced? Well, if you count the flames and the smoke as having mass, and this is empty space, you make the case, you probably would, that it's unbalanced toward the right. But I don't see it that way because of the number of soldiers here in these walls right here. It's almost like they didn't finish this section. I'm pretty sure that's what happened here. Maybe they were attacked and had to leave the artist. But if that was a solid wall, and this is, obviously this is thick, but then there are more, right, thick, heavy, lines here on this section of the wall, the outer walls. Obviously it's a compound with a courtyard, outer walls, inner walls, like all castles and fortresses would have had in the Middle Ages all over Europe and Asia. So you can just say that if you feel the fire has mass or volume, then you could make the case it's unbalanced toward the right. I think of it as roughly balanced, because this isn't really a mass here with the way the soldiers are arranged. top to bottom, you would probably make the case it's not unbalanced. It's unbalanced toward the bottom because of the pile of bodies and human bodies and horses below the midline and the empty space part of the upper part. The rhythm is obvious. The flames and the smoke, geometric details though they are, but they create repeated shapes, of course, as do the horses, the soldiers, and the walls of the castle here, or palace. Obviously, those are similar shapes. And then the largest mass is the fire, if you count that as a mass, I guess it would. Or is it the soldiers? Boy, it's a close call. If you count them as one mass, then it's probably just slightly larger on the total group of soldiers that are surging into this compound through the open doors here. You can say they're the largest mass, but I still think it would be the fire by a little, right? And then the group of invading soldiers, and then the longest section of the wall would be third. It's diagonal lines everywhere because it is obviously, this is, like I said, the Japanese technique of oblique angles. Everything's at a diagonal, so it's all dynamic. And then, of course, the horses and the soldiers, there's none straight lines on them, and the fire itself. There's almost nothing stable except the edges of the walls here on these two, the corners, I should say, of the walls. The walls themselves are diagonal though, right? So just the corners on the inner and outer walls, that's all that's stable. Everything else is totally dynamic. For space, you have overlapping, right? I don't see foreshortening here. I don't see it on the wall, this or that wall, not at all. In fact, if anything, this wall gets wider. So all there is overlapping in this case. The colors are warm on the fire mostly, although there's some cool on the smoke around the edges. And then it's a mixture here on the gray horses and black horses are, of course, are the neutral ones. Here's a warm colored horse, and their soldiers, their uniforms are alternating warm and cool colors, reds and oranges, and then, of course, neutral gray and black on some of the uniforms and some of the horses. The walls, though, I should say the roofs on these two sets of walls, those are black, even if they faded a bit, so those are neutral. The lines are, like I said, bold around these two horse soldiers. I guess you just call them our cavalry, and at least around this dead soldier, you'd have to say, and all the walls, or at least the roof lines along the walls. And most of the soldiers, though, and horses in that group of warriors at the bottom are thin lines. Okay, textures. Are they realistic on the fire? Or they kind of look like it, but really they're not. They're not realistic on the fire, but they are very sharp and realistic on the horses and the uniforms, right? The soldiers. And I would say on the walls of the compound here, both the roof and the walls. Not on this, that looks unfinished, but the main part of the buildings here. It's probably very thick, heavy tiles on the roofs. And then finally, let's see, a balanced texture. Modeling. There's there is some. There's some. It's not a lot, but there's some on some of the horses, more so though on these two here and this horse down here. So just say, and the ones breaking through the gate here. So there is some modeling, but I would say most of it there isn't. I mean, around the edges of the smoke, I guess. But the walls and the roof lines, it's solid, either gray or black. And so that there isn't a lot of modeling, but there is some. Okay, I think what we'll do is I'll show you this, but I think I'll give you a break because it's been a full night here. The last one, so take your pens out now and do this so you don't waste time looking at, having to read about, let alone study for the final on the last slide on tonight's list, which is Monk, 2 words, Monk Sewing, and the artist we had is named Kao Ninja, circa 1300. The one at the bottom of the list of Japanese slides of Japanese art for 1400 is not going to be on the test, so it definitely is off the study list. So cross that out right now before we finish. Okay. Now I'm doing that as I speak to you. Okay, even though I'll just tell you, it's someone who lived in one of those compounds, probably the one, something like the one we saw at Nara, where they had the compound from 700, remember, outside in the mountains of Japan, who's making his own clothes because monks living in those compounds would have had to do that. And this is a very simplistic version of, or simple, I should say simplistic, that sounds like a criticism, a simple kind of version of the lifestyle of a monk living in a retreat, a Shinto Buddhist retreat, in what would be then the Middle Ages. No, actually late. It would have been late Middle Ages, with a lot of nice touches like the trees and the moss hanging from them, branches and the leaves, of course, and his clothing. That's part of his new set of robes that he's supposed to be somehow making for himself. But you don't need to write that. I just thought I'd mention what it is. Okay, so let's stop the share here, and I'll take any questions you guys might have. Okay, anybody have any questions about anything we've covered tonight? Get your papers are due 1 week from tonight before midnight. And if you want me to read them, you need to, or feedback before the deadline. Don't wait until Sunday. You need by Friday, say Friday evening, to give me some time over the weekend to look at them and give you feedback. But the sooner the better. If you want to submit them early, or you just submit them without saying anything, just the attachment, remember I already held it up, I can do it again. They have to be a PDF, but preferably sent to Mark W at AOL, because I'll get them more quickly and more reliably, log them in, and you'll get the grade back sooner if you do it that way. But as a PDF, I will send you the cover sheet on the weekend. I forgot to mention that. Probably Saturday. Yeah, so you'll have it a couple days earlier. The cover sheet should be part of your PDF file as a total file, hopefully one single file, PDF file, where the cover sheet will be with the paper. And don't forget that you need to write your tagline. Hopefully you're using the same name on it as you were used to enroll or register for the class, right? And send that to me at Mark W at AOL. But if you send it to Outlook, again, I will accept that. Of course, it is the alternative choice, but you might not get them back as fast. It's due 1 week from tonight on April 25th by midnight. And I will send you an email to remind you when I send the cover sheet for everybody. Okay. All right. And then the only other thing is the extra credit options. I think a couple people started to ask, but we got 2 or 3 people joining us late. I don't know if they're still here. I don't want to have to repeat them. I'm not going to do that now because they're all on that list. But any specific questions about any specific options for extra credit, I can answer those, or any other questions about grading or that I haven't already answered about the papers and the way you should submit them. Remember, it should be, underline, right? First, it's art 1.1, short paper number 2, underline, last name, comma, first name, which is what you should have done. Most of you did on your first paper. Okay, any questions now about anything relating to anything we've covered tonight, or any other question about art? Extra credit, I should say, or good. Okay, so have a good week, but you should be working on your paper and finish them. Try and finish them before the weekend. It's a good idea. And if you want me to, you need to ask me specifically if you're sending them in early. I'm sending this in early so you can, right, ask me to say, can you give me some feedback? Because if you don't do that, I'll just log it in as an early submission. All right, that's it. One more time. Anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you, you guys. Yep. That's it. All right. You have.
Oh, no, say thank you. Bye.
Yeah, let's hope the Warriors do well. Okay. All right. We'll see.